Everybody, welcome. It's me, the Miller Lode. This is Cliff Bleszinski. This is Fred Schreiber. This is it. We're starting it off.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's I'm currently writing my memoir, and it's essentially like, when you're fighting yourself, it's like fighting Dark Link, and it's like unpacking like 25 plus years of experience, and talking to my writing partner. He's like, "What were you doing in 1994 in that moment?" I'm like, "I don't friggin' know." Oh, by the way, can I swear?
Yeah, you can cuss all you want.
Hell yeah, it's realms deep.
I know.
We invented swearing in video games.
But yeah, I was talking to Fred before you got on about the current state of the industry, and I don't want to sound like the jaded guy who's like, "I made enough money, I'm taking my ball and going home." I just not the biggest fan of the way the industry is these days, which is why I think the retro stuff has become such a thing. I look at the videos of the new Unreal Engine. I look at PlayStation 5, and I'm like, I'm just gonna go play Animal Crossing now. It's so funny because tying into the retro theme of what you've been doing, and Fred's been doing to some extent, is that I'm actually getting checks on Jackrabbit, decent checks from goodoldgames.com, like Epic's honoring their contract. Which is ironic because I'm not getting any money off of Fortnite because I was technically an employee. And anyway, that's neither here nor there. Retro is in, there's a reason why people like their vinyl, and so the games that I play these days are generally, lighter and simpler because, as I was telling Fred before you came on, when I see these new game demos, all I see is the money on the screen. I wonder how many developers have been worked to the bone. I wonder how many families have been ruined. I wonder how much money is being thrown towards the marketing. I wonder what tricks they're doing to keep people playing that as one game to rule them all. And it puts me off. We have this amazing game room upstairs with our consoles, and the last game we played was Knights and Bikes by Double Fine because it's like tiny and cute, so I just sometimes less is more, and that's people love to throw my failures in my face, although, I've had more successes than failures. But Boss Key Crumbling, the studio that I did, broke my heart. And if I could go back in time, one thing I would do, the first game we had made, I would have made something small and hipster and indie, even retro, right? Instead of trying to shoot for AAA and only getting to like AA with what we did with LawBreakers. So thanks for coming.
That also hit that really, really bad timing where everyone was trying to be the next Candy Crush, and you're trying to ride this wave of, okay, what are we going to do that's the next popular thing, and how are we going to make a twist on it? Kind of fighting against the crumbles.
Yeah, I made the call on my blog years ago where I said the video game industry, when it comes to AAA, it has turned into the American restaurant industry. Let's take the pandemic and put that over here for a second. And where you look at the American-made restaurant industry, it's Olive Garden, Outback Steakhouse, Chili's, Cheesecake Factory. Everything else is like tiny and indie. And so you have your Call of Duty, your Assassin's Creed. If you're not an established brand, right, or something that goes viral, then you're fighting for scraps. It's a really, really complicated, tough business. For the time being, I'm absolutely happy that I don't have to be in it because I've run it. I sit there with game developer friends of mine having a pint, and I see the 1,000-yard stare. It's like I tell them, if you can, get fuck you money and get the fuck out. As much as I love video games and they've defined who I am and they've been good to me, making them, takes a toll.
What do you think about this differentiation between the AAA blockbuster single player type games and then the trendy games like Overwatch, League of Legends? Because I have a few nephews myself, and the funny thing is they are all into gamer PCs and gamer chairs and RGB lighting, but they know of 2 games, maybe 3. They only play Fortnite, maybe a little bit of Call of Duty, and maybe some FIFA, and they don't know about anything else in AAA, like Outer Worlds and all these games. They don't care at all, and that's very different, I think, from when I was a teenager playing the first Gears of War and so on, because then you were playing all these AAA games.
But if we go back to shareware, one of the things I'm mentioning in my book is that as a young dude who was working at McDonald's, and trying to make video games, shareware was a great way to have this amazing sampler of everything that was out there, from platform games eventually to 3D and everything and beyond. And, I was a hoover to the point where I beat, so many games back in the Nintendo because, I used my paper route money back in the day to buy those games.
You were in Nintendo World Championship, right?
Yeah, I came in second in the state of Massachusetts.
15-year-old Cliff Bleszinski.
1990. I was 15.
1990. My God,
Yeah.
that's incredible.
Yeah, it was a pretty seminal year because it was the year my dad died, the year I lost in the Nintendo World Championships, the year my nephew was born. Thank God for therapy. There's a lot to unpack there. But, I wanted to be somebody. I always said I got into this industry for 3 reasons. I wanted to make great games, I wanted to make money, and I wanted to be known for it. Back when I first got unplugged from the matrix of just sitting around making games all day long, and I actually started going into public in Raleigh with one of my friends who wasn't much of a gamer. I remember trying to tell people what I did. I made these games Unreal and Unreal Tournament, and trying to sound all cool, and they never gave a shit. It's a small southern town. But if I found anybody that said they played games, they'd be like, I play Madden, I play GTA, and then WoW came along. I have never seen a game more surgically designed to be addictive and to suck time out of you. What the fuck? But you can't argue it. It's a phenomenon, and I'm like, I played, Ultima Online back in the day. And that shit was brutal. You could dismember somebody and then watch their ghost, standing next to you going, ooh, right? that was the only MMO I ever got into. And, something else about the state of the industry that makes, again, I'm sounding jaded, but I've always been pro-developer. I've always wanted developers to be recognized and to make money. It kind of bugs me a little bit that some Twitch streamers, again, that's an exhausting gig, and some pro gamers are making more money than many developers I know will ever make in their entire life. And this is probably me saying, get off my lawn. But I've seen some shit.
But isn't that also the magic of the games industry being a creative industry? You talk about it's a thing that you just can't help it. I'm sure, if no game developer ever made any money, they would still make games because they just can't help themselves. It's it's a creative expression.
It is, but that's also part of the problem. Because you got to eat, and also what happens with a lot of these game developers is they blindly sign employment contracts without reading them. There's the old saying: you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And I am lucky. Tim Sweeney and Mark Rain were very good to me. Other developers aren't so lucky. When I started Boss Key, the first 20 employees got actual stock, not stock options. They got actual pieces of the company. It wasn't huge because I myself wanted to maintain the majority share, but I wanted to reward them for taking the risk on the studio that sadly, crumbled because the first 2 years of that studio were amazing. The last 2 years, year and a half, were utterly stressful and were hell for me trying to be the front man to a studio that was slowly circling the drain, and watching the daily active users go down, seeing the sales numbers, watching amount of money that was in the bank. I hope to never be a CEO ever again because it was the most taxing experience of my life. Hey, so can we talk retro shit now?
Yes.
Yeah, let's do it.
We throw this term retro around, like retro shooter, boomer, all this kind of stuff. And the fact is that you guys are old as shit, and I'm 25 years old, and I'm not one of you. So it's really amazing to me that you've kept your kind of level head. And something else that you touched on earlier was how you started off, scraping it at McDonald's, and you wanted to be somebody. And I wonder, with a guy like you, what keeps you motivated?
For me right now, again, not wanting to make games anytime soon, I've always been a huge fan of the old school rapper Ice-T. And he has a line from one of his raps where he's talking about writing his rhymes. And he said, on paper, and he says, the white paper and blue lines excite my mind, not allowing me to stop the rhyme till the whole motherfucking book's complete. Then I write in the back of the sheets. It's so funny because you look at Jazz 2, I was developing that at the same time as the first Unreal. I was working 16 hours a day and happy to do it. And there's a certain mentality in the game development industry where it's like the monks in a Monty Python movie where they're self-flagellating. Requiem, right? They love to try and outwork each other. I've been in studios where, there's this weird tension where the first person to leave gets this kind of vibe he's probably going home to his fucking wife and kids, You got to maintain your family, for fuck's sake. I learned over the years working in the industry that, especially being a manager myself, that I would rather have somebody who comes in and puts in a good 7 or 8 hours and gets their shit done and gets the fuck out, as opposed to somebody who fucks around online for 14 hours. So it's the rabbit hole of this business is very, very deep. I've seen a lot in the industry, mental health issues. I've seen addiction issues. I've seen affairs. I've seen, families shattered. The thing that people don't realize online, when they're complaining about, this weapon's overpowered, David, Call of Duty guy, fuck you, I'm going to come kill your family. It's like, these games are made by people.
Mhm.
They're made by living, breathing human beings with feelings. It's so easy to stand behind a monitor and sling bullshit at somebody.
I was actually just wondering, Cliff, how did it feel to be part of the early beginnings of the 3D shooter days? Like you were part of the Unreal team from very, very young, and you worked on one of the first 3D shooters. Like you worked on levels that helped define an entire genre, the most popular genre in the games industry right now. Like, what were those days feel like? Did you just make something that felt cool?
My career has largely been driven by envy and insecurity. So the thing is I remember seeing like images in Wired magazine of this long-haired dude, John Romero, and him and his Ferrari and his mansion. And, it went from like, fuck that guy, and then I was like, oh, I want to beat him. And then I was like, oh, now I want to beat him. And the thing was, I was never that good of an artist or that good of a coder, but I played every video game known to man up to that point, and I could speak the language. And I always say I was never cool enough for the cool kids, never nerdy enough for the nerds. And then, we were basically, wanting to take down id. That was our number one goal. Of course, we wanted to make money and make great games. id were the rock stars and the darlings of the business. And I remember when the Quake test came out, and I remember, trying to fluff up mentally not literally, because the employees, contractors, that at Epic at the time, like saying it's not that good. We had colored lighting, we had higher resolution textures and the characters and the environment. It took 3.5 years of basically living in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, and basically like just working our butts off 16 hours a day. I had to adapt from making 2D adventure games when I was a teenager, using Visual Basic, to learning how to make a platformer game with Jackrabbit, to then making the leap to 3D. I'll never forget. I visited my producer and musician for jazz, Robert Allen's place, editing levels, and he had downloaded the first version of the editor that Tim had been working on. And I looked over at his screen. I was like, "What was that?" He's like, "This is going to change everything. This is going to be big." And that was part of the genesis of what became the Unreal Engine. But Tim once again realized that take people who are creative, who may not necessarily be that technical, because the person who's creative and technical is a rare breed, but like make better tools. Unreal had this thing called constructive solid geometry back in the day, where imagine the world's entirely filled with concrete, and you have the various primitive bores that you can bore into it and carve things out of it. And I took to that like a fish to water. My levels weren't the best, but one thing that I had was a pretty good sense of pacing. I'd watched every movie that you could find, and and I knew that when it came to introducing monsters in a video game, you didn't want them to just burst out like a jump scare. You wanted to tease them almost like a strip tease. So if you go back to the first Unreal, with the iconic predator-like Scar enemy, you saw like a tail, you heard a growl, you heard them messing somebody up behind a door, you saw like a shadowy figure running away, and then eventually, I locked you in a hallway and started shutting off all the lights, and then I actually did it like a monster closet. I know it's a cliche now. Then the red lights were flashing and techno music was blaring and people were shitting their pants. That's one of the things I learned from Alien. And even, the lights turning off was taken from the old 1990s movie Event Horizon. So, I read every issue of the magazine Entertainment Weekly since 1990. I stopped when I turned like 38 or whatever, but because it's just like, why am I reading this shit? Just go online. It was a really, really seminal time for the industry. And the multiplayer for Unreal launched Broken, which, it really like put the fear of God into us, because multiplayer gaming Quake World was coming online. And that's when we doubled down and we were looking to do what we were calling the bot pack, because we had the first autonomous AI that had been coded for Quake as a mod by a guy named Steve Polge, who I believe is still at Epic. He's a good dude. And so we were going to make just a pack that didn't have to be played online, because not everybody had the internet back in the 90s. And I made sure it said on the box myself, does not need an internet connection. And Mark Rain had the genius idea of saying, no, we need to make this its own game. There's a lot more to it, but the thing is making the transition from 2D to 3D was a really, really interesting one, because I think if you look at the console space, that was a rough one. Because no offense to PlayStation, most of the PlayStation 1 games kind of fucking sucked. Like, the graphics were like wobbly, like Jumping Flash I loved. But Battle Arena to Shinden, Warhawk was okay. The 3D was super, super clunky until PlayStation 2. And that's when things really started to like gel. You know, I'll never forget the first time Tim Sweeney sent me the editor for Jazz Jackrabbit, because I couldn't figure out how to code C++. You know, I'm relatively smart, but I am not that smart. I could do Visual Basic. Tim Sweeney, one of his many billions, ironically, of strengths, is the ability to spot creative people and to provide the tool set for them to make a better car or whatever. And you know, he saw the editor that Ardian Brousset, who was my partner during Boss Key, who's now at Epic, again, full circle. It was incredibly easy and intuitive to use, and I had managed to teach myself Deluxe Paint 2. And the feeling of cobbling together those tiles with little jump pads and little, you know, weapon power-ups, and my first version of the cobbled together rabbit that I did together, like, and then actually having audio hooked into that, it was a high unlike anything that I'd ever had. You know, it was the whole like Frankenstein, it's alive moment. You know, I'm a big musical nerd, and there's a line from one of my favorite musicals, Rent, and there's a bit called La Vie Bohème, and they talk about the need to express, to communicate, to going against the grain, and not necessarily wearing a three-piece suit every day to work, you know. And we felt like the rebels, you know, and we felt like, you know, it was the wild, wild west when it came to the shareware days. And, you know, here's one of the things that gets me about that era, by the way, that pisses me off in hindsight, is the fact that, like, so many parasitic retailers would take the shareware versions and of the games, and they'd sell the shareware in stores with like shitty art, and like it's like you know, maybe your average person didn't have an internet connection or CompuServe to download it, right? I get it, but it's like, come on, man! Like, none of the developers who worked on those games ever saw a dime off of that crap. You know, that still missed me to this day. But you know, I'm happy, you know, thanks to goodoldgames.com, I'm still getting paid off of Jazz, so that's pretty cool. Once in a while, I'll fire it up, and you know, I feel like I'm like, you know, visiting with an old friend.